It's been 10 years since Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. Actually, it's been 10 years and 2 weeks and 1 day for you watching this. Because it's been 2 weeks since I released my review of the final episode, and in the week in between, I took a look at the Prelude shorts. Yeah, just do them at the end. Doing the Prelude at the end makes total sense. Bad playing on my part, but I do love the irony of it. But this video is going to be my Season 1 review compilation. We're going to take a look at each of the episodes, and we're actually, this time, going to start with the Prelude shorts instead of throwing them at the end. Could I've kept them at the end for irony? Sure. This time, I'm not. Will it make total sense? Probably not with how I recorded everything, but you know what? That's the way it is, so enjoy. And stay tuned to the end because I will be talking about my overall Season 1 thoughts at the end, so enjoy. So before I release my Star Wars Rebels Season 1 10th Anniversary Review compilation, I need to talk about the 4 Prelude shorts that aired on Disney XD before Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired at all. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. The Machine in the Ghost is the first of 4 Prelude shorts for Star Wars Rebels. This one aired on August 11th, 2014 on Disney XD. The premise of this short is the Ghost is having a dogfight with some TIE fighters. Kanan and Hera are giving contradictory orders to Chopper about what to repair, what not to repair, and priorities. And Chopper is just like, you know what? I'm gonna do it myself, and he does. So this short is very much getting us introduced to Chopper. The title is very much indicative of that. The Machine. Chopper is the machine in the Ghost. Also, I think the title is a play on some other sci-fi story. I can't remember what, but I feel like there was some other sci-fi story that used a very similar title. But regardless of that, here we basically learn that Chopper does a lot of the repair work, but more than that, that he has a bit of a snarky attitude. That he backtalks. The scenes where basically both Kanan and Hera are like, what did you just say to Chopper? And all that, but at the same time it's also showing us that they do appreciate Chopper as well. They'll play with him a little bit, pretending that Kanan got the final shot on the TIE fighters instead of Chopper, but that you can tell is more of a playful banter rather than dismissing Chopper's abilities, his capabilities. Though they do still, tell him to get all the repairs done, and Chopper backtalks to them. Which, by the way, I remember when Star Wars Rebels Season 1 was airing, a lot of comparison was made for Chopper to a cat rather than a dog for R2-D2, and that does kind of fit. Cats talk back or ignore you. Dogs? Not so much. So that's pretty much what I have to say about the Machine in the Ghost, so stay tuned for the next short, Art Attack. Art Attack is the second of 4 Prelude shorts for Star Wars Rebels Season 1. This one aired on August 18th, 2014 on Disney XD. So this is the Sabine short, but first we got to open it up where a stormtrooper is threatening a LaSalle resident to leave an area near a Imperial airbase. And then we get to see Sabine on the rooftops. She sneaks into the airbase area and she starts painting graffiti, and she is technically caught by some stormtroopers and who call for reinforcements, and then she leads them on a chase and they can't get her. And by the way, she's doing a lot of crazy moves in that. Like, how did she get there? Honestly, I think there's some justification for the decision to make Sabine Jedi in Star Wars Ahsoka. The fact that she can do these pretty insane moves without being caught is quite impressive. But eventually, Sabine leads them back to where she started. She leaves though an explosive device on the TIE fighter, and then she skedaddles, blows up, and that provides a distraction for Hera and the Ghost to leave for wherever they were. Of course, the last line from Sabine is indicating that for her, her art is explosive. That she's more impressed not with the explosion being big or causing a distraction, but she's most impressed with the colors that she was able to produce with said explosion. And apparently the stormtroopers somehow survived and are now covered in paint. And another key thing too is that she leaves two LaSalle residents are basically thanking her subtly in how they are holding their hands and such. I think that's designed to show us that the Empire's presence on LaSalle is not a friendly one, just like that first scene. And that citizen at the very beginning that the Stormtrooper was threatening appears again at the end. But more than anything, this short was to introduce us to Sabine, who she is as the character, and that is she's an artist. And there's also a scene where she insults the Stormtroopers by saying that they're doing everything by the book and it's a short book. And while this is not later revealed until, I don't know, remember if it was season 2 or season 3, but that Sabine at one time was at the Imperial Academy, so she actually did read the book like she said in this short. This short is called back in the final episode of season 1 as well. I talked about that in my review, so go check that out. But let's stay tuned for the next short, Entanglement. Entanglement is the third of 4 Prelude shorts for Star Wars Rebels Season 1. Entanglement aired on Disney XD on August 25th, 2014. And this is the Gail Zeb Aurelius short, or Zeb as we all call Gail Zeb Aurelius. Zeb is supposed to meet Kanan up for a rendezvous point. Who knows what is plan they have to fight the Empire going on. But anyhow, he comes across 2 Stormtroopers bullying a local merchant. So Zeb decides to take them out. Of course, more Stormtroopers comes up and all of a sudden Zeb is in a fight. He stumbles across a TIE fighter and as more reinforcements arrive, they damage the fuel tank and that causes the TIE fighter to explode. And Zeb does not accept an offer from that merchant for a credit chip, but instead takes one of the pieces of fruit that the merchant was selling, and then most Stormtroopers arrive. During all this, Kanan's just listening in on the comms, basically complaining about him getting into a fight. Zeb does say, it just kind of happened. Well, he did kind of instigate it. As this is the Zeb show, this is supposed to tell us who Zeb is. He likes to fight, but he also basically is a gentle giant. He is physically the biggest member of the Ghost crew, and so a gentle giant is actually probably a really good descriptor of him. He sees the Empire picking on a merchant, so he takes action. And he's able to pretty much embarrass the Empire. In fact, there's a line where Kanan asks Zeb if he's embarrassing the Imperials again, and Zeb's reply is, it's hard not to. He is embarrassing the Empire, but tyrants deserve to be embarrassed, and so do their lackeys. And that's pretty much the short, so stay tuned for the next and final short, Property of Ezra Bridger. Property of Ezra Bridger is the 4th and final of the 4 prelude shorts that released prior to the airing of Star Wars Rebels Season 1. Property of Ezra Bridger released on September 1st, 2014 on Disney XD. This episode is the Ezra Bridger short. We opened up with Ezra walking through the grass fields of Rasal, whistling, and then there's a firefight in the sky above him and a TIE fighter crashes, thanks to the ghost. Well, anyhow, Ezra runs up and his goal is to steal some components off the TIE fighter for the black market, but of course, he messes with the TIE fighter pilot, who by the way is the character Baron Von Ruder, who we see multiple times in Season 1 and later seasons, I believe, of Rebels as well, and also I'm pretty sure was a TIE fighter pilot in the previous short Entanglement. Anyhow, Ezra does get away, but when the TIE fighter pilot realizes what Ezra did, he tries to shoot Ezra with the TIE fighter's cannons, which are still operating, and Ezra uses the Force to avoid getting hit. He doesn't know that's the Force, but that's what happens, and then he uses his energy slingshot to incapacitate the pilot. And then Ezra leaves, mocking the pilot who earlier said the TIE fighter was property of the Empire in, a snooty accent. Ezra mocks that by saying in a snooty accent, this helmet is the property of Ezra Bridger. And then in his regular voice, or is now anyway, walks away. Like I said earlier, this short introduces us to Ezra. He's a street rat trying to get by to survive. But there's another thing about this show that's not really a character thing. It's a title thing, because when this short released, there was actually 2 different titles. StarWars.com gave the title as Not What You Think, but Disney.com and Disney XD gave the current title Property of Ezra Bridger. They later rectified it and made it all Property of Ezra Bridger, but for a while, there were 2 titles going around. By the way, I do think Property of Ezra Bridger is the better title, so I'm glad they decided to go with that one instead of Not What You Think. So now that I took a look at the 4 Prelude shorts individually, we need to talk about them as a group. There's one big flaw in them. There's no real short dedicated learning about Hera and Kanan. The closest is the machine in the Ghost, which was all about Chopper, and we got some good scenes with Hera and Kanan as well, including one scene that indicates their romantic attraction to one another. However, there's really no short focusing on one or both of them together, as the other characters take more of a spotlight. Hera gets barely any voice lines in Art Attack. Neither of them are in Property of Ezra Bridger, but at least we get to see an extended conversation over the conversation between Kanan and Zeb in Entanglement. So basically, I wish they made at least one more short, so that way we could have learned more about Hera and Kanan's characterization going into Star Wars Rebels Season 1. But despite that one flaw, these shorts were a great way to get us introduced. In fact, given Kanan and Hera's role in the story, learning too much about them actually might have been a downside for the stories they wanted to tell us in Star Wars Rebels. Though we don't really learn much about Hera's backstory until Season 3 or Season 4 of Star Wars Rebels, so we got a while to go on that. At least we learn about Kanan a little bit sooner, and we learn more about both of them actually in the Bad Batch of all places. But that pretty much covers most of my thoughts on the 4 Prelude shorts for Star Wars Rebels. It's hard to believe, but it's been over 10 years since Star Wars Rebels premiered. I should say actually it's been 10 years and, well, 6 days for me, 7 days from you, because I'm recording this on the 9th and you're watching it on the 10th. Hopefully, you could be watching it on the 11th or wherever in October 2024, or even later. That's how YouTube works after all. So I'm going to be going through and rewatching every single episode of Star Wars Rebels and reviewing it. For the first season, at least half season, I'll be releasing them about 2 days after, well, 10 years, 2 days after the original air date. But after that, it's just going to be one a week. So expect those videos on Tuesdays. So just thought I'd lay that out before I actually talk about Sparkle Rebellion. And I gotta say, it was a blast rewatching it. It's the first and second episode, but it's basically a made-for-TV movie, hour-long altogether. And it does what it set out to do. Set the spark of rebellion and introduce us to the premise of Star Wars Rebels. What the quote-unquote status quo will be. I.e., we were introduced to Ezra. He's a street rat, space Aladdin, if you will. But he has a heart of gold. Just like Aladdin. There's a reason why we all made that comparison back in the day. We are introduced to Sabine, Zeb, Kanan, Chopper, Hera, Kallus. Those are, and of course the Grand Inquisitor, so he doesn't play a role in this episode. The episode opens with Vader giving a message, basically tasking the Grand Inquisitor with his mission, i.e. hunt down the children, the Force, so basically new Force-sensitive children, and any Jedi he comes across. Now obviously the Grand Inquisitor would have already known that message, that mission, but it's supposed to get us caught up and establish the threats. And then at the end of the episode, Kallus contacts the Grand Inquisitor that he's encountered a Jedi, Master and Padawan. So it's not until the end of the episode that Ezra becomes Kanan's Padawan. Though, of course, we learn more about Kanan as well and how he never actually completed his Jedi training, but he did a pretty good job with Ezra. But again, this episode is all about introducing us to Ezra. So we know he's street smart, he's crafty, he gets himself out of a lot of situations. I mean, he's captured by Kallus and the Ghost crew comes to rescue him. He's already halfway to the hangar before they even approach the Star Destroyer. So he knows how to get out of a bind. He also gives them the information they need to rescue a bunch of Wookiees. And of course, yes, that's on Kessler as well. Kanan reveals himself to be a Jedi to everyone. But Ezra also, he can't believe he's doing this. This is the second time he said that, because he also couldn't believe that he was letting them know about the trap. But he goes and rescues one little Wookiee that's being chased by a Stormtrooper. So, Stormtroopers are not nice people, guys. They're chasing young Wookiees for no reason other than because the Empire told them to. If that. Stormtroopers are fanatics, let's remember that. But Ezra rescues him, confronts Kallus, and then Kanan swoops in to save the day. But yeah, like I said, he does try to steal Kanan's lightsaber again, but he does give it back and essentially accepting the offer to be trained in the Force. So there's a lot of other stuff, the first time he sees Sabine with her helmet off, Ezra of course tries to flirt, he fails, of course he does, and that's actually something that, especially in the first season, Ezra often does try to flirt with Sabine, but Sabine just rejects his advances. Obviously, they're young, they're fighting a rebellion, they don't have time for that stuff. Plus, over the course of the series, and as we see in Ahsoka, it definitely develops into some kind of love, though it's definitely portrayed more as sibling love. But of course, a lot of us do wonder, could there have been something more under slightly different circumstances? After all, Star Wars Rebels very much did do the, found family vibe, which is a very common trope in Star Wars. You have, Kanan as the father, Hera as the mother, Zeb as the older brother, Sabine as the older sister, and Ezra as basically the problem child. Oh, is that Chopper who's the problem child? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he has the highest kill count in this episode, but that's Chopper for you. Our favorite war crimes happy astromech droid. So, lots of stuff that, especially in season 1, is set up and all that. But one thing I do want to address, because I'm watching and reviewing this way after Rebels, after a bunch of other things, there's some things like you could reinterpret how some of those scenes are perceived. There's one scene where Hera is remarking that Ezra reminds her of somebody. Obviously, in the narrative, we're supposed to be thinking of Kanan, but at the same time, it's like, well, we've seen her appearance in Star Wars: The Bad Batch, and I mean, she's seen some pretty crazy stuff, so we could reinterpret that scene differently, though I do think the original intention is the best interpretation of the scene, i.e., someone who's connected with the Force and will ultimately always do the right thing. Hera has the line where the first time when Ezra goes to do something and he says he can't believe he's doing it, she says she can. Because, yeah, people who have a natural connection with the Force, especially the light side of the Force, do very much exhibit a natural, selfless tendency, so it makes sense. And I'm pretty sure Hera had met a few Jedi too before she met Kanan. But yeah, there's so much more other small stuff. But really, the goal of this is to take a look back at Star Wars Rebels and really just reappreciate it. I did not review the majority of the episodes. I know I reviewed, I think, every episode of Season 4, and I think at least half the episodes of Season 3. That's when I started my YouTube channel, so my reviews are going to be very different. I'm not even going to bother rewatching my reviews of those episodes when I get to them. I might even private them because I'm not a big fan of them. A good way of saying it is I've gotten much better at expressing my thoughts and trying to look at my reviews and give things more from a what are they trying to tell us, how well are they achieving what I liked, what I didn't like, rather than just a plot recap. Granted, that still often happens in reviews because you have to discuss the plot, to talk about it, and what stories they're trying to tell. But this is something I've been thinking of doing for a while, and the fact that the 10th anniversary came and I didn't do anything for Star Wars Rebels prompted me to actually decide to do my reviews. So, not only am I rewatching MASH, I'm now rewatching Star Wars Rebels, but you know what this does for me? It gives me some reliable content. And also, you know what? I like Star Wars Rebels, so any excuse at all to rewatch Star Wars Rebels. And I might find I liked it more than I did initially, and there might be some things I realized, oh, this is so much cooler, or this is saying something I didn't realize it said the first time, and that's what I'm hoping to get out of this rewatch. Obviously, with Spark of Rebellion, I didn't get too much new stuff, just, like I said, a few things that you could reinterpret slightly differently, but the goal of Spark of Rebellion is to introduce us to the premise of the show so that the subsequent episodes make sense. So that way, we've been introduced to everything that we need to know for the story to make sense. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So 2 days ago was the 10th anniversary of the premiere, the air date of the 3rd episode of Star Wars Rebels, Droids in Distress. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So like I said, this is the 3rd episode, mainly because Spark of the Rebellion is technically episodes 1 and 2 because it's a two-parter, but I did talk about it as one episode because that's how it aired. But anyway, Droids in Distress, well, right off we're getting our nice quick connection into the main Star Wars saga as, well, we get 2 very familiar droids, who also managed to appear in every saga film and Rogue One did not appear in Solo to my knowledge. If you haven't figured out, this is the episode where we see R2-D2 and C-3PO. So, let's just sort of get the premise of the episode. The Ghost Crew, they're running low on funds for food, fuel, and everything else that they need. So, they're living on a budget right now. So they take a job for Vizago, so that's the crime boss that we did actually see them deliver the blasters to in the previous episode. Did we actually see Vizago in that episode? I don't recall for sure, but regardless, there's a shipment that they need to intercept and deliver to him, and he'll pay them for it. Turns out, those are actually T6 disruptors which were banned by the Senate. Clearly that does not stop the Empire, because the Empire wanted them. And then somehow, Mr. Tiya, which is just one of the Imperial officials on the Saw, is tasked with retrieving them on Garel, and she has to take public transit for that. And somehow R2-D2 and C-3PO are assigned to be her interpreters for an Aqua who's selling them to the Empire. Yeah, that's a bit convoluted. That's probably my only downside with the episode is, why does an Imperial Minister have to take public transit for this? And why are Senator Organa's droids the ones assigned to her? How did that happen? Granted, there was probably some Imperial spying going on, because I have a feeling R2-D2's initial, main mission was to sabotage it somehow. Because one, C-3PO blabs. They wouldn't have put him on such a sensitive mission, at least not with R2-D2 to supervise him. But anyhow, that's kind of besides the point though. The rebels, get the droids all sent to the back of the shuttle. Is that an intentional reference to how during Jim Crow America, it was very common that African Americans had to sit in the back of the bus? Was that an intentional reference? Perhaps. I mean, Star Wars has fumbled the basically droids' rights plotline a lot. Solo treated as a joke. The Mandalorian also had an episode where it basically, we don't mind serving kind of deal. So they've always fumbled that metaphor. So was it intentional? Was it not? And if it was intentional, did they fumble it? It's hard to say, because that was not the point of the episode, so they did not dwell on it. With the droids in back, Mr. Tiya can't have a translation anymore, so Sabine volunteers to transfer, mentions her time at the academy, which is actually the first time we got a reference, but we know from later episodes that she was an Imperial cadet, but at this point, we just think it's a convenient lie that she's telling as a part of the cover in order to mistranslate so they can mistranslate so Mr. Tiya and the Imperials go to the wrong hangar, while they go to the right hangar and intercept the cargo, where they find out it's the T6 disruptors, which Zeb does not like. So if you don't know, the T6 disruptors are an ion disruptor, very good at disabling ships, but apparently what they do to organic beings is horrific. And the Empire used that on Lasat, so Zeb's homeworld, to exterminate the Lasat. Yeah, so you can understand why he has such a negative reaction. And then, of course, R2 boards the Ghost with them too, because he has a secondary mission too. And we don't figure that out to the end of the episode, but him and the C-3PO get aboard and all that. And there's a scene where Ezra is kicked out of the room he shows with Zeb, and he doesn't understand why. Hera explains why Zeb is so upset because of the T6 disruptors and their history with his homeworld and his species. And then they deliver them to Vizago, but because C-3PO is just an idiot, I mean, he's a lovable idiot, he reveals their location to the Empire because C-3PO doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't realize he's actually working for the Rebel Alliance or what's going to become the Rebel Alliance. He doesn't know that. R2 does, and R2 is fully willing to help. He helps Sabine devise a way to destroy the T6 disruptors, which, here's my thing. Chopper either really loved that or really hated it because Chopper is the war criminal, not R2-D2, though both of them, all those sayings are bleeped for some odd reason. And there's a couple of fights between R2 and Chopper during this. And some of them, I think it's just them clashing personalities, but it makes sense. Like, the minute they meet, they stop fighting. Because R2-D2 is more of a dog and Chopper is more of a cat. It really does fit, actually. But going back to, they get away, they destroy the remaining disruptors that Vizago did not take. He did not pay them for the ones he took either, but they do get some payment from Bail Organa for returning to him R2-D2 and C-3PO. Of course, they don't know it's sent to Organa. Surprisingly, you think one of them would have figured it out. Like Hayward, I think is most tuned into the news, or Sabine. Well, I don't know. Sabine only Canyon went aboard the tainted foe, so there's a reasonable explanation. Because if you saw Sabine or Hayward though, yeah, they would have recognized Bail Organa for sure. But anyhow, C-3PO goes to shut down, and then Bill starts talking with R2-D2, asking if he got the information, i.e., he's investigating this rebel cell. He wants to know if they're going to be a good fit for the Rebel Alliance stuff. That was R2-D2's other mission, his probably maybe primary mission or a good bonus second mission, because Bail Organa, he clearly knew there was a good chance that a disruptor shipment was going to get intercepted by the Ghost Cell, and he wanted R2 to be there in order to collect information on the Spectres. And he gets that information, and the ending scene, Bill bends down, and it's basically a recreation of Leia putting the Death Star plans in R2-D2 from New Hope, which is just a lovely scene, how they call it homage to it and all that. And one of the droids is the same, and Leia's adoptive father, who raised her, not her bio dad, but her real dad, the dad who raised her. But like I said, I did a lot of plot recaps in this episode because most of this episode is a plot point. It's supposed to introduce that the main rebels, the Rebel Alliance, has their eyes on the Spectre, and eventually they'll be connected to that wider group, but still they'll just slow down. So that was one point, but the other big point was revealing the history of the Lasan and the rivalry that's going to be established between Gil Zeb Orrelios and Agent Kallus at ISB, because Agent Kallus was there on the Lasan during the Empire's extermination and claimed that he personally ordered the use of the T6 disruptors on the Lasan. So yeah, so that makes Zeb pretty mad, and he basically gets beat by Agent Kallus until Ezra uses the Force to push Kallus out of the way, and now Ezra's official Jedi training will begin. Seems like Ken's been dragging his feet on it, and while Hera's probably been prodding, it took this use of the Force by Ezra to, I think, truly prompt him to begin the training. But that's all I got for you today. I do hope you enjoyed my review. It's, like I said, there's not as much interesting stuff going on. I did mention some stuff like how Star Wars constantly fumbles droids' rights plotlines, that there is an allusion to historic discrimination in the United States, with the droids being sent to the back of the public transit. So there's some stuff there, but not really executed on. And there's some other good stuff. Most of it is establishing that background for Zeb more than anything else, and hinting at the wider rebellion beyond our main characters. But that's all I got for you today. I would love to hear your thoughts on Droids in Distress in the comment section down below. Fight or Flight, the 4th episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1, aired 10 years ago, 2 days ago. So, Fight or Flight, like I said, it's the 4th episode of Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels, and it's a great fun episode. So, the episode begins, we gotta set the scene of course, Ezra's trying to use the Force to lift the bowl. Chopper messes with him by lifting the bowl. And then of course they're running after each other, run into Ezra's quarters that he shares with Zeb. Of course, Zeb doesn't want to get waked up, he doesn't want to get involved. And Chopper also removes the bolts holding up Ezra's bunk. Ezra climbs into his bunk, falls on Zeb, and now Zeb and Ezra are fighting. Hera gets frustrated after they crash and that, and sends them to pick up supplies and tells them not to come back until they get a Meloon Run, which is a fruit that's not native to Lothal. Doesn't grow on Lothal, so a wild goose chase, so in this case a wild Meloon Run chase. Anyhow, they get the supplies and they actually find the Meloon Run. Unfortunately, the Empire has already bought it. Well, anyhow, they ended up stealing a TIE fighter and losing all their supplies. But you know what? They do eventually get the Meloon Run, and that's what they return at the end of the episode. All the other supplies they didn't get, but they did get the Meloon Run. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff going on. A Mr. Sumer, a friend of Ezra's parents, is in this episode. The Empire is taking his farm because he won't sell it to them. Ezra and Zeb, using their stolen TIE fighter, helps him escape along with his wife. I presume it's his wife, just the way they interact. And then also, I'm going to guess his employee. Granted, now what they're going to do, I don't know because they don't have the farm, but hey, at least they're not prisoners of the Empire anymore. Yeah, and then of course, they crash the TIE fighter deliberately. Okay, I'm putting that in air quotes because one, the way they are acting kind of behaves like they didn't actually crash it, or if they did, they didn't do it on purpose. But we know what actually happened because I've already watched the show. But I'm not going to spoil that if you haven't seen Star Wars Rebels yet already. I should also mention, doing all this, Sabine is painting something in Zebin and Ezra's room. Hera is like, what's going on? Sabine doesn't tell her, but Hera's like, well, it's not my room. And at the end of the episode, it's revealed she recreated in her style, her artwork, Ezra's bunk falling on Zeb and Chopper's just laughing it off on the side. It's really good and funny. Not to mention, Ezra and Zeb forgot to remove the TIE Fighter's tracker, which, no, they can't figure it out, and they're acting like they already did it when they stole the TIE. Yeah, not the case. Really, it's a filler episode. At least we thought it was. Like I said, there's more. This episode does actually contribute to the season finale in a way. Actually, not in a way. Very much because of this TIE Fighter. Yeah, I might actually be spoiling it now. Oh well. So if you don't know, they needed to use a TIE Fighter in the season finale. And they have a TIE Fighter right now. So I remember when this was airing, people talked about this being a filler episode, but turns out this episode was not filler. And that's actually something Star Wars Rebels did really good. They had a small element in a filler episode be really important to the season finale or even the series finale, which I thought was really great. Even Mr. Sumer, he returns in a much later episode. Was it season 4? Season 3 or season 4? Season 3, yeah, because this was before the base on Attilan was discovered. So even that is brought back up in the show. Really, Star Wars Rebels is one of the best Star Wars animated shows ever. Really, Star Wars has always done a good job with animation. Even Resistance was a really good show, which I really need to rewatch Resistance as well. But we're going to focus on Star Wars Rebels for right now. But that's where I'm going to leave you today. I would love to hear your thoughts on Fight or Flight in the comment section down below. 10 years ago, plus 2 days, the 5th episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD, right? I just totally forgot. Yeah, I made this to be on Disney XD. And the episode is The Rise of the Old Masters. So, the premise of the episode, it opens up with Kanan trying to train Ezra, but no, it doesn't go well. Ezra is unfocused and undisciplined. That kind of fits with Ezra. And then they later, are listening to the Imperial propaganda, because I guess they like knowing what the Empire is saying, and is interrupted by apparently a dissident senator who reveals that Luminara Unduli is actually somehow still alive and being detained by the Empire. So, what does the Ghost Crew do? They decide to go rescue Master Luminara Unduli. And because they have to break into a prison to do so, that's very hard to break into, and also hard to get out to. Well, it turns out it was a trap, and they're confronted by the Grand Inquisitor, who basically also calls Kanan unfocused and undisciplined as well, and Ezra's retorted them were perfect for each other. And they escape. So, there's a lot of neat, small little lore stuff, but let's actually talk about what the characters go through. Because, basically, it's subtle, but Kanan, he doesn't feel like he can train Ezra. And, of course, Ezra's discouraged by the fact that apparently Kanan wants to pawn him off on someone else. And that won't be resolved for at least another episode, as I recall. But this is really important stuff because it's establishing lots of their characterizations and all that, self-doubt, all that stuff. And another thing important to take note of is when the Grand Inquisitor calls Kanan also unfocused and undisciplined to Ezra, Ezra responds then we're perfectly for each other. Now, the reconciliation, the understanding between the two of them does come through at the end of the episode, but it's not cemented. And if I remember correctly, there's a later episode where it's properly cemented. I want to say, just looking at the titles, I think it might be episode 10, but I could be wrong. Again, it's been a while since I watched Star Wars Rebels, so we gotta see how this stuff, plays out and all that. But Yeah, so they do begin their training, but you can still tell I don't think they've fully figured out their master Padawan relationship yet, and that's going to be unfolding in future episodes. But there is this one great line from Ezra when Kennedy quotes Master Yoda, "Do or do not, there's no try." He responds, no, he asks, "What does that even mean?" And that comes back at the end of the episode well, Kanan resolves basically he says that he's no longer going to try to teach Ezra, instead will train Ezra. Whether or not they succeed is a different question, but in some ways it's that mentality, do or do not, there is no try. It does not mean you can't try something new. It means if you come in with the mentality of I'm just going to try it, especially a new activity or something you've never done before, a task, if you have that try mentality, that means you're almost planning for failure, which is not a terrible thing to plan for, mind you, but by planning for failure, you have doubt of your abilities to succeed. And with the Force, you have to have confidence. You can't be overconfident, but you have to have confidence in your abilities, in the will of the Force, and your ability to communicate to the Force. Otherwise, your task won't get accomplished. And even if you do have confidence, that still doesn't mean it won't fail. It could still fail, but by going in with the mentality that you could fail, you're more likely to fail. Essentially, that's how they break that stuff down. But really, there's not much to say. It's a good, fun episode, but it's actually probably not one of my favorite episodes in season 1. Of the episodes we already got, and I think I like all those previous episodes a lot more, and there's a bunch of really good episodes coming up as well. So this could actually be my least favorite episode of season 1, but that does not make it a bad episode, because it's still a really good episode. But that is where I'm going to end my review. I want to hear from you guys. What did you think of Star Wars Rebels Rise of the Old Masters? Let me know in the comment section down below. So 10 years ago, plus 2 days, the 6th episode of Star Wars Rebels aired on Disney+. The episode is called Breaking Ranks, so let's talk about it. So first, let's summarize the plot. Good place to start in my opinion. So, Ezra infiltrates the Imperial Academy for youngsters, I forget the exact name on the song, in order to get some information, the Imperial decoders that will help the rebels, help the Spectres, I should say specifically, intercept a kyber shipment the Empire is going on. While there, he meets two cadets, one who's looking for his missing sister, and another who is likely force sensitive. So that's basically what's going on. But that's just the premise. That actually doesn't tell us what has happened. So let's first talk about the first cadet, Leonis, that Ezra meets. Leonis, his sister went missing at the Imperial Academy, and he wants to find out what's going on. He suspects the Empire is somehow responsible for his sister's disappearance. And while he helps Ezra complete Ezra's mission, i.e. he lets Ezra know that if he takes the decoder out of Callus's office, an alarm is going to go off that sends the entire thing into lockdown. So they come up with a different plan that actually works. Ezra uses the Force and goes to the vents, all his normal stuff, and they get a decoder. But coming out from getting the decoder, Ezra is going over another office and hears the two of the Imperial officers who run the academy come, Taskmaster Grunt and Commodore whatever. I forget exactly what the titles and names are. Pretty incompetent officers, by the way. We'll see them in a couple of other episodes this season before we see Tarkin. Anyhow, he overhears them talking with the Grand Inquisitor about two cadets that meet certain expectations, check marks, whatever term you want to use, as the Grand Inquisitor has people looking out for that could reveal Force sensitivity. As well, obviously. And then another cadet named Jai Cal. I hope I pronounced his name right. Star Wars names are notoriously difficult to pronounce. Anyhow, so Ezra overhears that, and then so he sends with Chopper the decoder out so that way, the Spectres can actually complete the mission. Kanan and Hera go off to do that. They successfully destroy the crystal. Escape at the last minute because a kyber crystal destroying, being blown up, yeah, not a great thing. Vaporizes a bunch of Imperial ships. So that's more of a side tangent. So I really did like how that scene with Kanan and Hera fighting the Imperial convoy and all that is intercut with Ezra's escape attempt for the Academy, with Jai-Kel and with Leonis. So they wake up Jai-Kel in the middle of the night to tell him that he's in danger. He's a bit reluctant, but he does agree to go on with it, and they're going to take their reward for completing their assessment, i.e. still getting access to Imperial Walker, to steal it to make their escape. Ezra doesn't make it because he jumps down to stop another cadet from the word I am searching for some reason is another cadet from sabotaging, I forget whether it was Jai-Kel or Leonis, sabotaging their run, so that way in order to not prevent them from getting out. I think I phrased that right. And so Ezra does that, but he manages to get to the Walker, he jumps, and of course the Imperials think he's trying to attack the Walker single-handedly when he does that. But anyhow, they get out though. Leonis decides to stay behind in order to continue searching for clues on what happened to his sister. And the episode ends with him talking with the Grand Inquisitor. And the question is, at this point, is the Grand Inquisitor going to sense that Leonis is lying, is helping the rebels? Well, thankfully, it's not 10 years ago. We actually know what happens with both Jai-Kel and with Leonis after the episode ends. So, first, let's talk about Leonis, because his story does not finish in Star Wars Rebels or any other live-action TV show. Instead, it finishes in some books, and I totally forget the book's name, but he finds his sisters being held on, I believe, Arcanus, and then with the help of Spectres, he gets out, he gets his sister out. Seems like it's a fairly happy ending. There's connection with General Hux from the sequel trilogy, as his father was running the academy at that time, and we have to see more of Brenda Hux's teaching style in the Aftermath trilogy. And then with Jai-Kel, well, we see him later on in Star Wars Rebels helping the rebels out, so that's good. And we also get to see him in Ahsoka. That's right, in the first episode of Ahsoka. Yeah, or is it episode 2? No, yeah, it's episode 1. We see him, and he's the center for us all now, so he did pretty good for himself. I still want to see more of Leonis, but hey, it's good that both of those stories we do have endings for. We do know what happens to them after this episode. And Star Wars is really great with their interconnectivity and all that, really building out a unique, interconnected world that's, maybe not every event is always going to be related to each other, but there's always a degree of separation to get there. And speaking of connections to other Star Wars books, the Spectres are going after a Kyber crystal to stop the Empire from shipping them. 1, we see that later on in Star Wars Rebels, but 2, this is also connecting with Rogue One, because Star Wars Rebels 10 years ago. 10 years ago. So, The Force Awakens came out in 2016. Rogue One was 2015 was The Force Awakens, 2016 was Rogue One, and 2017 was The Last Jedi. I'm recording this in 2024. So not only was Star Wars Rebels 10 years ago, 9 years ago was The Force Awakens, and 8 years ago was Star Wars story, Rogue One. I know I said that backwards. It happens. So yeah, quite a long time ago for those stories. It really feels like they're still new stories, but there's been so much Star Wars since then. But 2 years before Rogue One came out, they were already in Star Wars Rebels laying the groundwork for Kyber crystals being related to the Death Star and all that. They might have established that as some other reference books too, but we just love that interconnectivity there and building up to a future story that we probably didn't even know the name of. 10 years ago, I was still in high school back then, so yeah. But that really covers most of what I wanted to say, or does it? Because I really talked about the connectivity, the storyline, but what about the plot? What about character development and all that? How about this? When Ezra lets the Spectres know that he's going to stay one more day in the Imperial Academy in order to help other cadets get out, he says that their influence are rubbing off of him because the old him would never have stuck his neck out for anyone the way he is doing. So that's showing that even in the 6th episode, Ezra's already a much better person than he was way back in Spark of the Rebellion. Even Spark of the Rebellion showed that Ezra, he did the right thing in the end, and frequently he does the right thing often in these past episodes, but the idea is that before he met the Spectres, before he met the Ghost Crew, Ezra had no incentive, no reason to do the right thing. He was prioritizing himself. But now that he's met the Spectres, he has a reason to do the right thing. Honestly, the old Ezra always, I think, wanted to do the right thing. But because of survival, because of being alone, he never had the confidence, the courage to actually do the right thing. But now being with the Ghost Crew, I think he now has that confidence. And I think this episode, where they put him on his own once again, shows it, because yes, he still has their backing. He knows that they're there to help him if needed, but he's still ultimately making the calls on the ground by himself. He can't call them to say, hey, can we do this? He has to make that call himself, and he does. And really, we see this in future episodes with Ezra's growing as a leader and all that, but this is showing he's making calls on the ground that will ultimately be beneficial for the rebellion. We see that. Jai-Kel, he assists in destroying the TIE Defenders. In fact, if I remember correctly, Jai-Kel in the last episode, it was the person Ezra tasked with playing a specific message that will contact the Purgos to help them defeat Thrawn. I'm pretty sure that was Kel who Ezra entrusted. So if Ezra never made that decision to help Jai-Kel escape the Academy in this episode, then they likely would not have been able to defeat Thrawn as soon as they did. Which is just like the build-up. 4 seasons build-up. That's assuming I get the characters right, but still. There's just so much going on, but Ezra is becoming a better person, and also he's making good decisions that ultimately prove out correct. And obviously, once the Ghost School figures out why he was staying behind, they support him, but definitely initially, they thought he was, being a bit crazy. I.e. Zeb was. But like I said, I think that's all I truly got to say now. Is there more? Yes, but that's what the comment section is for, so let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. 10 years ago plus 2 days, the 7th episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. The episode is called Out of Darkness. So let's just jump right on into the episode. Opens with Hera, Sabine, and Ezra in the Phantom, and they're being pursued by TIE fighters. They've been getting intel from a contact known as Fulcrum, and apparently Fulcrum underestimated the Empire's strength in whatever their target was. Anyhow, Sabine's not feeling too comfortable with all this, and especially the secrecy. She mentions her time at the Academy and how they had not wanted her to ask any questions, and she can't be in that situation again. So she goes along with Hera on a supply run to pick up some supplies that Fulcrum is providing, hoping to meet Fulcrum. Anyhow, Fulcrum's not there. Instead, it's on an abandoned Star Wars military base, and there's a bunch of ravenous creatures that don't like the sunlight, but light from like a flashlight or something, though it doesn't hurt them, but initially they are scared of it until they realize it doesn't actually hurt them like the sunlight does. Probably the UV light in the sun is my guess. But anyhow, there's a leak though on the Phantom because Ezra and Zeb and Chopper got fighting, and so didn't finish actually repairing the Phantom. Forgot to check the diagnosis that showed that the fuel line was leaking, so Sabine and Hera are stuck on the plane and they have to call for help. Thankfully they come and they are able to improvise at least a delaying tactic so that those creatures, Phinox if I believe, don't actually overwhelm them. They use some like domium and all that and the blasters, and it works out pretty well. The Ghost comes in with Cannon and Ezra, Zeb, and Chopper, and they're able to pick them up. And that's where the episode ends, though Sabine does know that she still needs more. It's a lot to ask her to trust without giving her all the information she needs. So that's, I think, going to be a ongoing thing, if I remember correctly, because I know what comes next. I know what really comes next. I know who Fulcrum is. But when we were originally watching this, who was Fulcrum? We didn't know. the possibility was that Fulcrum could have been an Imperial agent messing with rebels to, get them killed off. That was a possibility, as I recall, way back when Star Wars Rebels was initially on the air. Granted, what we know now, with everything that has happened with Star Wars Rebels and since then, the fact is, Sabine is asking who Fulcrum is, wants to know who Fulcrum is, and Sabine does actually learn who Fulcrum is, and do I want to spoil it? It's a 10-year-old show, but spoilers. Fulcrum at this point, because there's another Fulcrum in Star Wars Rebels, but Fulcrum at this point is Ahsoka Tano. And we find out in the Ahsoka show that Ahsoka takes Sabine on as a Padawan. So, this is literally an episode showing when they first communicate, because there is a communication between Hera and Fulcrum. But the fact is that so much of what has happened since then, we never imagined when this episode was on there. The fact that we once saw that the possibility of Fulcrum being an Imperial agent who was feeding false and bad intel to the Spectres and other rebels was a legitimate possibility at the time. Now, obviously when they were writing this, they knew who Fulcrum was because they revealed Fulcrum as Ahsoka in the season finale. But the thing is that when we watched it, I've said this several times, we didn't know. And rewatching and knowing this stuff is a very different experience. I know these expectations, so I'm not consuming these stories the same way I did last time. I'm picking up on stuff I hadn't noticed before, but I'm also, because of that, appreciating some of the groundwork that they laid in ways that I hadn't before. Like, obviously, the Fulcrum thing was going to be a major part, but Fort Anaxis, the old Clone Wars base, that appears on later with one of the Ezra storylines, and also canon as well. But still, that shows up. It also shows up in season 7 of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Well, we had originally seen it with the unfinished Bad Batch arc episodes, but then when they finished it, we got to actually see it during the Clone Wars. And so some of the stuff, like, it's neat and all, but it's even more neat seeing how they took stuff from the Clone Wars and then stuff that they never thought they were going to be shown off in the Clone Wars, then they were actually able to in the Clone Wars. And I think that's partially because of the success of Star Wars Rebels. But still, this is just a good, fun episode, really. Well, maybe fun's not the word, a good word for it, but it's definitely very good. It advances. It gives us more insight into characters, especially Sabine. Most of the previous episodes have been more Ezra focused, which makes sense. He's the first character we're really introduced to. So it makes sense that we would get more character development for him. We got a little bit about Zeb. We learned a little more about Kanan. But still, Hera and Sabine at this point are the two characters, along with Chopper, that we probably know the least about, at least their backstory. And actually, we don't learn about Hera's backstory, if I remember correctly, besides how it connected with Chopper's backstory, which is not much. Though we do eventually learn more about Hera's backstory in Star Wars: The Bad Batch. But the thing is, this is really the first true Sabine episode. Way back in the the third episode, the second one aired because episodes 1 and 2 were the two-part television movie that aired as one episode. But Droids in Distress, we get the line that Sabine was once at the Imperial Academy. Back then, was that just a one-off line that they were using in order to trick the Empire, trick the Minister Tiya, or was it legitimately using Sabine's backstory to trick the Empire rather than a lie to trick the Empire? Well, in this episode, it's confirmed that Sabine was once at the Academy and her experience there was not good. They lied to her. She couldn't ask questions. If she did, sounds like she was punished. Really painting the Empire as an abuser, where how Sabine needs answers in order to feel safe. I can definitely see what they did there, and I know I did not pick that up on the first time, but now I definitely see how they're kind of painting the Empire in the position of an abuser, with how Sabine, when put in a situation where she doesn't know the answers, she reacts with hostility because she's trying to protect herself. I had not noticed that the first time, but I did this time. Partially because I'm older, I've watched more, I've read more, so I know more stuff now. But at the same time, it's true, maybe it's because we know more about Sabine's backstory at the Academy that I'm able to pick up on things early on. It could go both ways. There's more I can say, and you know what? There's a comment section for that. So that is continued discussion on Out of Darkness in the comment section down below. So 10 years ago, the 8th episode of Star Wars Rebels aired on Disney XD, plus 2 days from when you're watching this, of course. And the episode is Empire Day. So it's Empire Day. That's what's going on. It's been 15 years since the Empire was declared and Palpatine officially took control of the Republic. Because the Republic was already the Empire and all but named by then. But that's not just the context of the episode, it's actually really important to Ezra's storyline in this episode. So the episode opens with Kanan trying to train Ezra, trying to get him to let his guard down and connect with the wildlife on the Saw, specifically a loft cat. Does not go well. Ezra's in a mood. He's not really feeling like training or really doing anything and just wants to be alone. So that's essentially what he does. Though he doesn't really go on his own until they notice that there's a bit more ties flying around than usual, and of course see that the Empire is looking for a specific Rodian, which Ezra recognizes, named Sibo. Ezra goes to his tower, and that's really about what we see of him until later on in the episode. Meanwhile, what the Ghost Crew is doing, well, they're planning on disrupting the Empire Day celebrations. First, they create a distraction with some more detonators that create fireworks. We too yet a lot of fireworks. Hey, sci-fi technology. And then they blow up the prototype TIE Advance that was revealed at the Empire Day celebrations. Of course, the Empire is still looking for that Rodian and is prioritizing looking for the Rodian over looking for the Ghost Crew who disrupted the celebrations. But thankfully, Ezra does arrive, so Kanan doesn't have to, take out a stormtrooper and cause a incident even sooner where they could be clearly linked to the activity that they planned. And they do have to split up because with all the crowds and all that, they can't get to the normal rendezvous point. So Hera and Zeb go to an old market, then to go get the ghost, while Kanan, Ezra, and Sabine go to a place Ezra knows, his old home. And guess who they find there? They find Sibo, the Rodian that the Empire has been looking for. And Sibo has a bunch of very important schematics for the Empire. Schematics for ships, walkers, that stuff, but also plans and all that for trip deployments. Basically 5-year plans for the Saw and other surrounding Imperial-controlled planets in the Outer Rim. So really important that the Rebels get a hold of this. But it's also revealed that Empire Day is Ezra's birthday. Ezra was born 15 years ago when this episode takes place. He was literally born the day the Empire was declared. So you can understand why he's not in a good mood today. He's just not happy. His birthday was ruined by the Empire. And so that puts into a lot of context of why he's feeling, down, moody and all that. Because it's also revealed that his parents used to do underground broadcasts against the Empire. And there was at least one transmission left, one recording left at the desk area they did it. And while Ezra leaves it behind, I think Sabine might have grabbed it. I don't remember if she did or not. Because if she did, it would have. I think it does play a role in later episodes, but I just don't remember. But they steal an Imperial transport, they smash through an Imperial blockade, and then they get aboard the Ghost, and then we get To Be Continued. So yes, so the story that's going on is going to be finishing in the next episode. And I have to say, I don't remember this being a To Be Continued episode. Not being called, part 1 makes some sense. But it also shows how they're wrapping up for season 1A's end before they take a break over December. And so, I think December and January, so I'll also be taking a break then, but I'll clarify that next week, because I'm pretty sure there's one more episode before that break, and if I'm wrong, I'll just make an announcement video. But really, this episode did a really good job of giving more context for Ezra. He's been left alone since he was 7, so about half his life. His parents were arrested by the Empire for speaking out against the Empire. So being against the Empire does run in his family. But you can understand, being alone on the streets without parental support, he obviously did not have the best life, and probably the best thing since, having his parents is finding the ghost school because he has a found family. Star Wars has always been about a found family, especially in animation, but even not in animation. Though Luke literally found his family in the original trilogy in more ways than one, because he found his sister and found his father, neither of which he knew were his family when he met them. But Star Wars has always been Rebels, the Clone Wars has had found family, Resistance, the Bad Batch have found family. The Bad Batch, they basically become surrogate fathers and big brothers to Omega, depending on the context of the episode. But it's always been a major part in Star Wars. I even think Star Wars Visions have one or two episodes that rely on the found family aesthetic, plot, whatever term you want to use for the story. So it's always been a thing, especially in the main animated shows. Hopefully we'll get some more found family in whatever the next animated show is going to be. Skeleton Crew might even have some found family things going on as well, with a bunch of kids getting together and going on an adventure. That seems like a great recipe for a found family story. But yeah, this episode has just been really good. I really love the additional context it gives to Ezra's character, and hopefully puts him, actually we know it does, puts him on a place where he can overcome his trauma, where he can maybe not forget about it. He's not going to be like Kylo Ren, who's killed the kill the past, abandon if you have to, or abandon the past, kill if you have to. I forget the exact words. He's not going to be that way, but he's going to hopefully do the more Jedi way, where, yes, it's a part of him, but he's not going to let the trauma of his past dictate and control him. That's a good way of putting it. I'm pretty sure that's what we get, though. Ezra has a lot more character development to go on in Star Wars Rebels. But that's where I think I'm going to end my review. I would love to hear your thoughts on Empire Day in the comment section down below. 10 years ago, plus 2 days, the 9th episode of the first season of Star Wars Rebels aired on Disney XD. The episode is called Gathering Forces. And so what do? They gather forces, but not in the way that you would expect. So this episode picks up where the previous episode, Empire Day, leaves off. They've just gotten off the Saw where Seaboard's already that the Empire is after, and they're trying to make their escape. They're being pursued by TIEs. It's a very tense situation, but also during all this, Seaboard is struggling to communicate. His mind is overwhelmed with all the information in his cybernetic implant. Anyhow, he does reveal to Ezra that he knows what happened to his parents somewhat. Again, his mind is overloaded, so he's not making a whole lot of sense because he's struggling to communicate. But what we do learn is that apparently Seaboard was a friend of Ezra's parents. We actually, I think, knew that in the last episode. But apparently, it sounds like Seaboard, something was supposed to happen to Ezra's parents, was supposed to take care of Ezra, but he failed. He also failed to protect Ezra's parents. So Ezra's not really happy with Seaboard, doesn't really want to forgive him. Anyhow, they do make the jump to hyperspace thanks to Seaboard, because he, using his implant, was able to give hyperspace coordinates directly to the ghost. They make the way, but they're being tracked. Hyperspace tracking is not a thing! And just a note on that, I'm making fun of those people, but the thing is that there's two ways hyperspace tracking can be done. A tracker on the ship, as is the case in this episode, or complex computer calculations that make a guess. An accurate guess, but still a guess. That's how it's done in Last Jedi. I should do an actual video on that. But anyhow, they located the tracker is on the Phantom, which is detachable. So Ezra and Kanan go down to, well, the planet from, what's the episode name? The episode where we first learn of Fulcrum, the planet that used to be a clone base. That was those the Freynox. So Kanan has a plan to go there, lead the Empire there, and use those creatures against the Empire by connecting with them to the Force and direct them to attack the Empire instead of them. While Hera, Sabine, and Zeb take Seaboard to rendezvous with Fulcrum. That goes out pretty well, but this is very important. on the planet, for an axis is on the planet Nexus, which is now an asteroid because of a cataclysm sometime after the Clone Wars. But anyhow, Ezra's struggling to connect, and he's afraid. Now, he does admit that he's afraid, but his true fear that's holding him back with connecting to the Force, he does not want to admit even to himself, but he does admit. And it connects up with Sibo. He's afraid of knowing the truth. He's afraid of knowing what actually happened to his parents. And in that moment, he forgives, he lets that out and forgives Sibo. And Sibo somehow knows that Ezra's forgiven him. And I think, and Sibo also forgives Ezra as well. The Force made this possible. But after that, his mind is much clearer. He's able to more effectively communicate. Is it perfect? Besides with the cybernetic implant? No, not really. But he's able to communicate much more fully, and he is able to tell Hera what happened to Ezra's parents that way she can tell Ezra that. Granted, Ezra goes through a pretty big experience on the planet where he accidentally taps into the dark side of the Force when being confronted with the Inquisitor, and he literally summons basically the mother of all Phinox, which, yeah, even the Inquisitor is struggling to handle that. Anyhow, Kanan realizes what's happened. He picks Ezra up and they get off that planet ASAP. And Kanan does admit to Ezra that he's sorry for not preparing him for that, which is really good, showing their growth as master and Padawan, teacher and student. And now they do get back to the Phantom and all the Phantom. They get back to the Ghost and all that. And Hera clearly wants to tell Ezra what Sibo told her, but Kanan tells Hera that Ezra needs some time alone. Of course, he's not perfectly alone because while he's in the nose gun of the Ghost, just taking everything in, coming to terms, Sabine comes in and with the data disk that she grabbed out of Ezra's parents' old house on the Solid in the previous episode, she tried to recover what data was on there, and apparently all she could recover, or at least I don't know if anything else was recovered, but she was able to recover a family photo of Ezra with his parents. And that's where the episode ends. And she wishes him a belated birthday. This is actually probably Ezra's best birthday since his parents died. It wasn't a great birthday, but it was probably his best birthday. Living on the streets is probably not good. Actually, his parents didn't die, but that's getting way ahead of us. But yeah, this is probably Ezra's best birthday. And I think given that family portrait is what really makes his best. Yes, it reminds him of his parents, but now that he's come to terms with his fears regarding their disappearance, are they still alive, are they gone, are they, what that, he can actually enjoy that present because the past is not holding him back anymore. It's not dictating to him like it was. He still has a lot of growth to do as a Jedi, and that's going to be in the next episode. But we'll be talking that in over a month because while I was originally intending to do these reviews 1 week after time, I decided I want to keep the 10-year thing going forward. So come January, the next episode will be reviewed because it's a mid-season break now. But there's a few other things I would like to discuss before I end this video. I thought this episode was a really good episode because it really advanced Ezra's character. Before Ezra, he's the plunky street boy that's helping out some rebels. But now he's really tapping into the Force. He's growing up, for lack of a better term. He's coming into his own. We'll see a lot more of that later on, but this was an important episode because he would have still been that boy on the streets, even if he was doing good things, but he still would have been that boy if he did not come to terms with his fear revolving around his parents being taken by the Empire, and are they alive, are they dead, what's going on? Well, his fears, without coming to terms with that, accepting them and moving past them, he would not have been able to mature as a character. We would not be able to witness his character growth that occurs later on in Rebels without this moment. This was a key moment for his character development. But that's where I'm going to end my review. But I would love to hear your thoughts on Gathering Forces in the comment section down below. So I do want to say, Gathering Forces, when I watched this, this is not when they meet up with all the rebels, but the finance of their forces. I think I addressed that earlier, but I just thought I saw a little end commentary. But that's truly where I'm going to end this. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And of course, 10 years ago yesterday, on January 5th, back in 2015, the 10th episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. The episode is Path of the Jedi. So this episode continues off where the previous episode, Gathering Forces, left us. Well, not quite, because Gathering Forces did end the 1A arc of the season, the event sale, so it wasn't a cliffhanger per se, but this episode does deal with the fact that Ezra tapped into the dark side of the Force to defeat the Empire. The episode opens up with Ezra being late to Jedi practice. Apparently he was hanging out with Sabine. I think I know what's going on. So, if you remember, way back 10 years ago when Season 1 is airing, and also the previous episode where Zeb and Ezra steal a TIE fighter, and we learn later on that a TIE fighter gets painted by Ezra and Sabine. That's part of what's going on in the start of this episode, but hidden behind the scenes. Now, is that spoiling upcoming episodes? Yes, but I am talking about these episodes with the 10-year hindsight going in. That the fact that I know where the story is going to go. And so it's neat to see where these seeds are being laid. Now, this is only just the Season 1 laying, but I am going to talk about future episodes as well that this episode does lay the groundwork for. Kanan decides to do is take Ezra and the Phantom to a Jedi temple on the south, but of course it's going to be Ezra's choice on where to go, but he had a hunch because Losar being Ezra's home, there being a Jedi temple there, that the Force would guide Ezra to the Jedi temple. He was correct in that assumption, likely aided by the Force as well, so that worked out on him pretty well. He did admit he wasn't positive, he wasn't sure that Ezra was going to choose, in his vision, the Jedi temple on the south, but he does. I really like that scene though, because it does show that he did his research ahead of time. He made a prediction on what his Padawan's vision was going to be, and aided by the Force, he made the correct call. So they arrive at the Jedi temple, they look for the entrance, they find it, requires a Master and Padawan working together to open up the temple. Which, by the way, is very similar to how way in a later episode on Malachor requires two to activate the Sith Temple Zero as well. Interesting parallel though, but as I remember correctly, this is more a cooperation, while with the Sith it's more like a begrudging working together because one's trying to backstab the other. Which fits into that episode actually, but we'll talk about that then, but some, like I mentioned earlier, some groundwork that could be interpreted as laying the seeds for future episodes beyond Season 1. Definitely the stuff, like I mentioned earlier, that we're laying the groundwork for Season 1, that I think is definitely intentional. The other stuff might just be a happy coincidence. But of course, they go to the temple. Kanan is going to meditate in the main room with the bodies of other Jedi Masters whose Padawans never left the temple. Makes me wonder if they're still wandering around because the Force can be weird like that. And Ezra goes through and, well, first he picks, well, he doesn't really pick the wrong path, rather a vision of Kanan leads him down the wrong path. Grand Inquisitor confrontation of Ezra's fears laid bare to him. That's the point of that first part. Ezra witnessing and experiencing his fears firsthand. His master dying, the ghost crew not caring for him or using him, all that stuff. And he's finally able to defeat the vision of the Grand Inquisitor by admitting that, yes, he's afraid of being alone again, afraid of being, letting Kanan and the ghost crew down. That's what he's afraid of, but he's not necessarily afraid of confronting the Grand Inquisitor, afraid of death. He admits that that's something that doesn't really afraid him, and that's what allows him to defeat that vision. And then we hear the disembodied voice of Yoda to guide Ezra on the next stage in his experience in the temple, which leads him to basically more admitting why he wants to be a Jedi. Starts with because Kanan believes him, goes through he wants revenge on the Empire, wants them to make suffer, to finally admitting to Yoda, but more importantly to himself, that he wants to be a Jedi because what Kanan and the Ghost Crew have inspired in him. He saw, how they helped others and how that made others feel, and he wants to continue doing that. Not think of himself anymore. He doesn't want to be selfish anymore, which is a very Jedi attitude. And then a kyber crystal is given to him. Now, Ezra doesn't know that yet. Kanan reveals that to him when he returns. So again, really good episode, really good moment for Ezra. He confronts his fears, admits what they are, but what doesn't cause fear in him, what he's not afraid of. Then he goes on his second stage and admits why he wants to be a Jedi. He has to go through it all, but he does lie at what's the heart of it. His first answer is the selfish reason, the person that he wants to move beyond of himself. And eventually he does admit the real reason. Really good moment though, sets up who Ezra is and who he is deep down, who he wants to be. Fits very well in that regard. And during all this, Kanan has his own, not necessarily vision, but conversation with Master Yoda, which gives him some comfort. Once he gets over the shock of hearing Yoda's voice, he's surprised and all that. But essentially, he admits that his fear that he won't be a good enough master for Ezra, and that's part of his own fear. And Yoda gives him just some comforting guidance. Not too much, just enough to ease his own fears. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. Or is it? Because like I said, they come back together. Ezra shares his kyber crystal with Kanan, and Kanan tells Ezra that that's a kyber crystal. He can build his own lightsaber. And then cuts to, they leave the temple and all that. Temple goes back underground on assault, partially hiding itself from prying eyes and those who probably would seek to do it wrong. I said that way for a reason. I'll get to that in a moment. And then goes to the ghost where Ezra builds his lightsaber. Kanan gives him some spare parts he acquired. He got a power converter for Chopper. Chopper doing something selfless for once. Good on Chopper. The master murdering droid does have a heart in there somewhere. Zeb, I think, gave him some components. Sabine gave him some components, and the same thing with Ezra. Same thing with Hera. They all gave him some pieces here and there. Apparently, though, he went to Hera for, some very specific components. We don't find out what those are yet, but it's clear that Ezra's lightsaber is unique. It's not the traditional looking lightsaber. And then we get to see his blade. He's got a blue lightsaber. I should address what's special about his lightsaber because it does fit who Ezra is. His uniqueness, those special components, is a reflection of how Ezra is not a traditional Jedi. This is more of a term after Rebels, but a Boken Jedi, a Jedi trained outside the mantles of the Order, outside the temple. And having a non-traditional lightsaber is a good reflection of that in Ezra, especially because Ezra's the first Boken Jedi we see in the canon. We saw many in Legends, but that wasn't the Legends term. That's a distinct canon idea. And the fact that the first Boken Jedi we see, his lightsaber is also different, is, I think, special. It's unique. Now, this is probably going to spoil a future episode, but I just want to address what's special about Ezra's lightsaber is that it also contains a stun blaster as a part of it, which is actually really important when you think about it. They're fighting the Empire. They can't always reveal that they got a Jedi with them. Having the ability that he can carry one weapon that can be both a lightsaber but also a blaster is a really good idea. Very tactical, if you will. Very practical in a galaxy where the Jedi are in hiding. Now, I did say it was a stun blaster. I think it does have regular blaster bolts, but we gotta wait to see that later. Now, that addresses a lot of that stuff, but I had mentioned earlier that this episode sets up stuff for later in the season. Yes, but also later in the show. I already mentioned in connection with Malco with requiring Chewie to open/operate the temple, but there's other things as well. If you would take a note, in a later episode, Ezra, Kanan, and, spoilers, Ahsoka go to the Jedi Temple on Nassau and meditate, and they all have their own conversation with Master Yoda. This is actually, I believe, when Ezra realizes or learns that he was speaking with Master Yoda, because he didn't know who he was speaking with in this episode. This also brings up, too, Ezra received his Kyber Crystal in the World Between Worlds, which I think is very interesting. That shows that they were setting this idea up way back in season 1. Other people I know have pointed this out, but the fact that this setup dates way back to this episode is neat. Now, it's not as complete as we would see it later on when the Empire is doing the excavation, but it is very interesting. In fact, one thing because I know about the War Between Worlds and the connection to the Jedi Temple and Assault, I was paying extra attention to the background detail to see if I could spot like the mirror or the wands or some other indication of the War Between Worlds outside of the scene where Ezra gets his crystal, where we have the lines like War Between Worlds, and then as he gets his crystal, the War Between Worlds itself manifests. But I didn't see any other connection beyond that scene with Ezra's Kyber crystal. But that was something I was keeping my eye out for because I knew it was a possibility. And some other setups? Perhaps. But those are the main setups. And, well, yes, not all the setups I was expecting to see in this episode were manifested. That is part of the experience of doing this rewatch on the 10th anniversary. I know things about Rebels, but there's also things I've forgotten. So, taking what I know, I'm trying to pay more attention to see what things I've forgotten and what details I may have missed the first time, or what details that we all missed on the first time because we didn't know it was setting up something later. That's what I'm really loving about doing these 10th anniversary reviews. But that's where I'm going to end this review because the discussion continues in the comment section. Let me know what did you think of Path of the Jedi, and I'll see you January 20th for the next episode, so stay tuned. 10 years ago, on January 19th, 2015, the 11th episode of Star Wars Rebels aired on Disney XD. The episode was entitled Idiot's Array. And, well, this is the Lando episode, so they brought back a famous original trilogy character and they got Barry D. Williams to reprise his role. Well, this time just voice acting, he's not appearing in person. This would have been crazy for an animated show. The episode opens up with Zeb playing Sabacc against someone who turns out to be Lando. Zeb thinks he's going to win because he has Sabacc, and he's out of credit, so he wages Chopper. Unfortunately, Lando has an idiot's array. Knowing what we know from Solo and all that, there's a good chance Lando was cheating. There's a good chance. But anyhow, this sends them on an adventure because the guy gets some credits and the guy gets Chopper back now. And Chopper's not happy about it. But Chopper does get one over on Lando at the very end. Oh, does he? We'll get to that in a moment. But so Lando doesn't tell them his plans though. Hera Smart figures out at least part of it out, gets to the scary part to get away from the person that Lando is basically fake selling her to in order to get a puffer pig to mine minerals on Lasar because he can't have regular mining equipment because the Empire is going to seize it. Did you catch all that? Yeah. And as soon as Hera gets back on the Ghost, first thing she does, she punches Lando in the gut, and he admits that he deserved it. But first they have to get to the Imperial blockade. It's a crazy mess because the puffer pig's big, so Hera's not in the cockpit. Then Zeb accidentally leans on the controls, which turns their basically masking off, so now the Empire knows it's actually them. Thankfully, they do get away, land on the plane, but then they're confronted by the scum, the criminals that Lando got the puffer pig off of. Firefight goes on and all that. They win, but during all this, Chopper steals a canister of fuel. Of course, Lando says he knew that. That's why he never paid them because, yeah. I do wonder if it's all going to work out well in the end. Will they ever actually get the credits owed? Because, yeah. But the Chopper, the war criminal Chopper, he saves the day because, one, he uses the ghost guns. He doesn't kill anyone, so he doesn't have a kill count in this episode. I bet Chopper's feeling disappointed by that. But, like I said, he gets one over on Lando. Though Lando says he let him, but did he? Or is that Lando just recovering? Like I said, this is a very fun episode. And I first watched, I think, way back 10 years ago. I probably was like, ooh, Lando, I like him. You know, kind of deal. And can I say, Zeb, Kanan, and Ezra do not like Lando, and they were willing to turn him over to, I forget the guy's name, I should have remembered it. I don't think he actually appears again unlike Vizago does. Though he is name dropped in this episode, but still, they are not happy with him, which, yeah, makes sense, but no, it's just a fun episode, and that's what this episode definitely appears to be. Now, I do know later on, the fact that they had this contact with Lando does help them in the final episode. It's setting up something so that way, why are they asking Lando for help in the final episode of season 1 makes sense. But if you're looking at story, that it can feel like, why are they bringing a famous character? And in fact, that's still a valid question. Why did they choose to have Lando in? Well, if my timeline's right, this is not true for long after he lost the Falcon, so he's probably trying to make some credits. That's my best guess. If you want to try to think of a law reason. But the real reason is they just wanted to bring in a famous character. We already got R2-D2, C-3PO, and Bail Organa, so why not bring in Lando? Why not? And also just the absolute, he infuriates Kanan, who doesn't trust him. Zeb doesn't like him because there's a whole Sabak debacle. Ezra doesn't like him because Lando's actually appreciating Sabine's art in a way that, and somebody who appreciates art actually will understand, talk about inspiration in other artists. Yeah, you can see why they don't like Lando in this episode, because he managed to push the buttons in just the right way, which Hero calls him out for, saying that he was doing that on purpose at one point. Now, was he, or was he just trying to charm everyone and he was just failing with those three? Who knows? I even think he probably tried to charm Chopper, but this is Chopper we're talking about. Chopper doesn't care about anything really, it seems like at times. But like I said, overall fun episode. Not too much in terms of greater story until we get to the final episode of season 1. That's what's so great about doing these anniversary reviews. Things that might have seemed filler at the time, I can watch with the knowledge of what's coming forward, and I can pick up better on what's truly filler or truly not. Because I know the talk of filler was kind of common in the online discourse around Star Wars Rebels when it was airing. I was just getting onto YouTube back then and social media, so I was starting to be familiar with all the stuff that Star Wars internet fandom has grown and evolved into. But way back when this was airing, it was one of the few things people were talking about besides all the potentialities of what the sequel trilogy was going to be. Definitely a trip down memory lane. Granted, at this point in Star Wars Rebels, we have not reached when I started my YouTube channel. I'll let you know when we get to that point, but hey, it's a walk down memory lane, and it's been great fun rewatching these episodes. So join me in, I think it's 2 weeks, when I'll double check the schedule. Hopefully I'll flash the date up when the next episode airs, and I'll be talking about it, so stay tuned for that. 10 years ago, on February 2nd in 2015, the 12th episode of Star Wars Rebels aired on Disney XD. This video is going to be my 10th anniversary review of that episode, Vision of Hope. So let's just first recap the episode. The episode opens up with Ezra being trained. He's being trained to block blaster bolts, and he has to deflect them to hit a target, which is a Stormtrooper helmet. He's not doing that well. He's a bit distracted. It's getting closer to the time where a senator who's been speaking out against the Empire is about to transmit. A senator we've never heard of before, by the way. Anyhow, he eventually does deflect them all, but that's during a vision he has of what's going to happen in the episode. Of course, he doesn't see everything, so spoilers, you could say, he misreads it. He's looking for the best that the center is going to help them and all that. But of course, they do listen to the message, and turns out the center is coming to Lasalle, which is giving credence to Ezra's interpretation of his vision. But before that, since Ezra does have that contact in the Imperial Academy on Lasalle, he goes in and they find out that the Empire is planning on bringing a trap of some form that the Empire is on to the Center. So they do know that, though this episode, this actually does set up one of the young readers' novels that accompanied Star Wars Rebels, I believe, because Ezra's content is being sent off to the Imperial Academy on Arcanus now, so he won't be on Lasalle to give information anymore. But that's just a minor note there. Does not really impact the greater story too much. But they meet the center and all that, and it's a trap. It's a trap! They have a firefight and all that, and they escape through the sewer. They also get into the Lasalle's Old Republic Senate building through the sewers as well. And it's apparently dry now that the Empire is rationing stuff. Yeah. How nice is the Empire to be rationing people's water and food and all that. Not very nice of them. Especially because they probably don't need to be rationing. And I should also mention too that it's established that this Old Republic Senate building on Lasalle has not been used since the Empire took over and it sits abandoned, but has a pretty noteworthy mural as well. But anyway, they run to the sewers, and it turns out that the center is working for the Empire. trying to root out the rebels and all that. Of course he is. He's voiced by Brent Spiner. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. Brent Spiner plays Data in Star Trek Next Generation, but he also plays Law. And I feel like he changes more of the songs except for Data. Because nearly every song except for Data seems to have something wrong with him. But that's talking about Star Trek, not Star Wars. And Hera and Kanan are more skeptical of the Senator, and so there's a moment where Ezra and Hera are going to try to disable a fan so they could continue going through. Hera hands her blaster over to the Senator, but she makes sure it's basically set to safety. It's turned off so the Senator can't use it, and he tries to betray them. And that's how they figure it out, and then they leave him there. And they successfully escape, and Ezra asks Hera what's wrong with them, and she says they have hope. And I said the line, I hope I said it correctly just now, but I said the line before she said it, which makes sense. Vision of hope is the title of the episode, and hope is a big theme in Star Wars. But hope that the Empire can be defeated. And yes, while the Senator was working for the Empire, the truth is, as Ezra said, his messages, his transmissions inspired him and probably inspired many other rebels as well. In attempting to root out rebels, there's a good chance the Empire created more rebels. Which is actually kind of what happens in Star Wars The Force Unleashed. Not two, but in one. So I think that's a kind of a neat little connection there. Was it intentional? Probably not, but sometimes let's mention Star Wars Andor, the episode, the axe forgets and the tree remembers. The axe is a heavy hand, but the tree still remembers, and that can inspire more hostility, more opposition to the Empire. Not quite the same, but it's the same mentality. If you inspire people to either hope in a better future or inspire them through anger to oppose the current regime, you're going to get more opposition. That's how people operate, especially when they feel like things are not going to get better. I should also mention too, the scene with the fans definitely reminds me very much of some of the scenes in Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. Don't know if that was a call out or not. Also remind me a little bit of those spinning drill things on Zephyr in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. So that covers most of the episode. There's some small things that didn't really fit into my plot recap and the commentaries on those specific beats, such as when they enter the sewer, Chopper goes up first to save the droid and pushes the droid down into the sewer. Chopper was so happy about that. And when the Empire comes sealing off sewers, Chopper immediately begins trying to cut it open once again, and, well, Kanan just uses his lightsaber and Chopper gets mad about that. Just hilarious. But ultimately, those are some nice scenes with Chopper, and he gets to do a little bit of wall climbing for himself. Our favorite little war criminal in Star Wars, I would say. But the episode is more than that, those fun little bits. It's really about, and I think the biggest part of this episode is that hope. Yes, Ezra misread his vision, but he still had hope. He still had hope in that better future, and the Senator still inspired hope despite being an Imperial plant. He still created that hope, and yes, the rebels are surely going to let the other cells that they have contacts to know that not to trust the Senator. But the thing is his transmissions went out to everyone, and there could be a few individuals who have been inspired but not been connected to the rebel network yet in some form, and could inspire people to fight against the Empire, resist the Empire as well. That's what was created with the Senator. The Empire, like I mentioned, created its enemies, but it's also created hope. Hope in face of tyranny is one of the most consistent things in Star Wars, and that's what this episode was. Ezra, with his vision, he had hope that the Senator was on his side. They all hoped it, but even with the Senator being shown to be a traitor, being an Imperial loyalist, it's still showing that same hope. Hope in a better future. So that's where I'm going to end my review. I do hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know your thoughts on the episode Vision of Hope in the comment section down below. 10 years ago, on February 9th, 2015, the 13th episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. That episode was called Call to Action. So let's recap the episode. The episode opens up with the Ghost crew basically running away from an Imperial patrol. They successfully deal with them and skedaddle back to the Ghost, where they see a transmission from the senator from last week saying that he's recommitted himself to the Empire and that he hopes that his followers will do the same. The thing is, like I said last week, his followers, or at least some of the people he inspired, are still going to be inspired to fight the Empire despite his recommitting himself to the Empire publicly. That's still going to happen. And of course, the Ghost Crew is a little depressed. So Kanan gets the idea of maybe they should make their own transmission to inspire hope in the people. And so they start planning. Meanwhile, guess which Imperial official shows up on Lasal? That's right, Grand Moff Tarkin. Thank you, Jeff. I don't know if Jeff guessed it. I don't even know if I have a Jeff watching. I just chose Jeff as a random name. But Sam, next time don't say Vader. That's a later episode. Again, random name. I don't know. I'm just doing what some YouTubers do. Anyhow, Tarkin comes in. He basically takes control of Lasal, of the Imperial operation on Lasal. He interrogates Taskmaster Grunt and the other officer with him, whose name I forgot. And he has the Grand the Grand Inquisitor, not executed, though he does execute them by beheading. And Minister Tiya is shocked. Even Chaos is shocked. And yeah. So he's not taking a no-nonsense approach. He's going to punish failure. But the thing is, that's going to create an atmosphere of fear within the Imperial ranks, which is likely not going to lead them to doing their jobs well. So, good for the rebels, bad for the Empire. So, the rebels, going back to the Ghost Crew, they're scouting out a Imperial communication tower because they're going to hijack it to send a message that way it's not traced back to them as clearly. No, just traced to the song. And, well, a probe droid there because Tarkin has all the probe droids everywhere to try to find the rebels. And Ezra uses the Force to get a Lost Cat to jump on the probe droid to disable it so they can get to the speeders and get out of there. Well, of course, they should have probably made sure the probe droid was fully disabled because it does transmit an image back to the Imperials, and Tarkin decides to lay a trap. They're not going to increase security at the communications tower, but they're going to be ready to respond when the rebels actually take action. Right now, the rebels get there, all is going to plan, and then the Empire shows up. Shocker. So they do a quick change. They're going to pick up at the top of the tower instead of at the bottom, and Kanan stays behind to delay the Empire. He does a show duel with the Grand Inquisitor, and, well, he does commit perfidy, which is a false surrender. Why do they do that? But again, when you're dealing with the Empire as rebels, sometimes you may just have to do things like that to get an edge. And it's not like, he was right away. Like, potentially, if that was the best way to delay, he might have kept on doing it. Who knows? Hard to say, but it does happen, and we should acknowledge it. They do that way too often in Star Wars. They need to book better on that. False surrenders is not really a good idea, because there's a lot of problems with that. But anyhow, Kanan is captured, and the Empire does destroy the tower to stop Ezra's speech, because Ezra's the one they chose to do the speaking. But he does pretty much finish his speech, and it's really a call to action to people to stand up to the Empire, to have a hope, to say that they, the rebels, are not criminals, but rebels fighting for the people to end the tyranny of the Empire. He calls on his own life experience, where how his family taught him stuff, and then his new family has reminded him of basically, being kind to others, standing against authoritarianism and tyranny. A call to action. And the Empire can't let that, so they have to destroy the tower. But Ezra does complete his message. Now, in this episode, we don't know does that message get out, but spoilers, we do know from the following episodes that people do hear the message. We know that. In fact, this is way spoiler for, I think, season 4, but we find out that Ezra's parents were still alive, just being held in an Imperial prison camp, probably forced labor camp, and it turns out that they heard the message as well. Their son continuing their legacy, because his parents once transmitted messages against the Empire as well. In face of authoritarianism, in the face of tyranny, you need to speak up where and when you can, and despite the consequences. Freedom of speech is a fundamental right. There's a reason why the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is, well, it's a couple of things, but includes freedom of speech, freedom of expression. To let people take that right away is dangerous. If you read On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, highly recommend it. But there's several chapters, but including do not obey in advance. That is chapter 1 for facing against tyranny. Do not obey in advance. And that includes do not remain silent in advance of tyranny. You gotta speak up as it's rising, because that increases the chance of tyranny being defeated before it can take hold. We need to speak up. We have to speak up. And it's frustrating that I have to wait a whole 2 weeks now instead of 1 week to talk about the next episode, since I'm doing these basically 10 years to the date, almost. So, do I push ahead? No, I'm going to do something else for next Monday, but we'll see that when it comes out. I'm not going to spoil my plans for you yet. But anyhow, I do want to hear your thoughts, because this episode is really all about a call to action. It's call to action in your voice. But it's also to remind us that when we see tyranny, we cannot be silent. When we see oppression, we cannot be silent. And that's where I'm going to end this. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you took something away from it. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. 10 years ago, on February 3rd, 2015, the 14th and penultimate episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. The episode is Rebel Resolve. This episode follows the events of episode 13, Call to Action, where Ezra and the Ghost Crew broadcasted a message of hope to inspire hope and action against the Empire, and Kanan let himself be captured by the Empire to make sure the rest of the Ghost Crew could get away. So, the episode follows all that, and we cut between Kanan being interrogated by the Grand Inquisitor and by Grand Moff Tarkin, and the Ghost Crew trying to rescue him. First, I'm just going to address the stuff going on with Kanan. It's mostly pretty box standard interrogation. The Empire is getting nothing out of him. Kanan has he's not saying anything. He also doesn't know anything to say as well. But eventually they decide to take him someplace else that has never failed to extract a confession from prisoners. We'll get back to that later on. But the Ghost Crew, they're trying to rescue Kanan. So the first thing they do is they attack a Imperial walker in a small town to try to tap into Imperial communications. But they get nothing because the communication tower was destroyed at the end of the last episode. That's, in my opinion, very good on following through on the consequences of what their actions cause. Not only did the Empire destroy the communication tower so they can't use it to tap into Imperial networks, but also the Empire is giving them more attention. Hera has a conversation with Fulcrum, where Fulcrum says that the Empire is paying more attention to rebel activity, and that in order to protect their cell, they need to go to ground and hide a little bit to hopefully have the Empire forget about them. Hera is not totally happy with leaving Kanan behind, but unlike the rest of the Ghost Crew, she does understand the logic behind it, and she decides, yeah, they probably do need to lay low for a while. But of course, the rest of the Ghost Crew, no. So, Ezra and Sabine and Chopper hatch a plan in order to go and get some information. Zeb is roped into this as well, and he has no problem once he learns what they're doing. Chopper distracts Hera, while Zeb, Sabine, and Ezra fly the Phantom to Vizago. So this is the crime lord they've occasionally worked with on the past in order to get supplies and all that. But this time they're going to try to see if he has any information to help them in their quest to rescue Kanan. So, at first, the Vizago does not want to cooperate, but when Ezra reveals that both him and Kanan are a Jedi, and that if he helps them, they'll have they'll repay the favor at some later time. Ezra initially adds in within reason, but Vizago will not have that. Maybe some more negotiations, but hey, Ezra is still growing up as a character and all that. And I do remember in a later episode this does come to play, but that won't be till next season at the earliest. But Hera finds this out. She figures out what they're doing, mainly because she knows Chopper so well, and she knows Chopper's trying to hide something from her. And either she get a confession out to Chopper, or she just guessed what they were doing. Either way, she's there, and basically she hopes that the information is good given what he just gave away. And Ezra actually did get some pretty decent information, though I'm surprised they couldn't figure this out themselves. But what the Empire is doing with the communication tower being destroyed is using courier droids in order to relay communications, orders, and all that between the different bases and ships. So what they decide to do is they ambush a squad that's escorting a courier droid, paint Chopper up to look like it, and send Chopper on its way. Chopper gets in on the ship, gets the information, and then extracts himself while spacing for stormtroopers. Little war criminal. They also to have a brief firefight with that ship that Chopper was on, and during it, the courier droid puts out a fire that was preventing Zeb from being able to engage the Imperials. And afterwards, Zeb is like, and Sabine and Sing Ezra was like, yeah, let's keep him. Chopper's not happy and pushes the droid out, and it falls to the ground with us all. Thankfully, the courier droid does survive and looks like it's going to be living the rest of its life among loft cats. As I recall, we don't ever see this droid again, but I think it would have been neat if we did see that. But at the very end, they do go through the data they got, and they discover where the Empire is sending Kanan, to the Mustafar system. And Hera says that she's only heard that name once from Kanan, who said it was a place where Jedi go to die. Now that's something that I can be taking a note of because it can be interpreted two different ways. So let's go with first the dualist explanation of that. Us, the audience, know that's where Anakin and Obi-Wan's duel after Anakin fell to the dark side, where Anakin was cemented as Darth Vader. I would say it happened when he killed the Jedi younglings, but given the narrative, I think George Lucas was going for Mustafar was where Anakin truly died. Any chances he had at returning to the light in that moment, with Padme there, were gone. It was until Luke came around, there was no other chance. So Anakin died on Mustafar. That's very much the dualist explanation, but also from a Watsonian explanation. I believe there's a reference somewhere in some Star Wars media that said that's where Anakin Skywalker died in universe. Again, I'm not quite sure what work. You can let me know that in the comment section down below, but that could work too. But there's another context that did not exist when this episode aired. The Star Wars Jedi games, specifically Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and related, you see this in Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi as well. Fortress Inquisitorius, which is on the planet Nur, which is a neighboring planet to the planet Mustafar in the Mustafar system, where Inquisitors take Jedi, where they torture them, where they put trophies. It does make sense in retrospect. Now, was this something they had in the back of their heads about Fortress Inquisitorius being near to Mustafar back when they made this episode? Maybe, maybe not. But that is a neat additional enrichment that future Star Wars stories have done to this story, and I really just love that, and I think it's a great way of expanding the world where we can look back on something where it made sense back when the show was made and makes even more sense now. And that's not even mentioning the fact that Darth Vader's castle is on Mustafar, which we first see in Rogue One, which came out in 2016. And that was probably already in development back when this episode was being developed. So there's a good chance that's what they might have been thinking behind the scenes. But regardless, it works, and the future works only have further enriched it. Because I know where the episode is going, I don't need to speculate that they're going to rescue Kanan and go to the Mustafar system. But this episode ends with that to be continued. This was designed to be that cliffhanger, and it's an effective cliffhanger. It leaves us with that dread about, oh crap, what's going to happen on Mustafar? Is Kanan going to survive? It's a very effective cliffhanger. And yes, I know where the story is going to go, but it's still, in my opinion, very effective. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. 10 years ago, on March 2nd, 2015, the 15th and final episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1 aired on Disney XD. The episode is Fire Across the Galaxy. So this episode continues the plot arc started with Carter Action and continued with Rebel Resolve, the two previous episodes. So they gather information on where Kanan is. So the Ghost crew are ready to hatch their plan, but first they need to steal a Gonzati class cruiser / transport. So Sabine goes to an air base and distracts the stormtroopers there while Zeb and Ezra steal the Gonzati, and they get away, destroy all the ties. Now, I do want to address one thing. I have not reviewed the shorts that were released before season 1 of Star Wars Rebels aired. There's 4 of them. A lot of them focus on character spotlights. But one of them was a Sabine short, and that was Sabine infiltrating this very ill base, and she doesn't destroy any TIE, and she might destroy the TIE fighter or two, but she did her artwork paints and all of that. And actually, the explosion she causes at the end of this scene in the current episode does the smoke does form a phoenix, hence Phoenix Cell. Really good there. But I just want to address that short and they have characters called back to that short where the stormtroopers are saying when they issue the intruder alert, the artist is back. That's who they refer to Sabine as. Sabine comments that their aim has gotten better, but she's gotten better. So this scene very much calls back to that earlier show that I have not yet covered. This scene also puts Sabine's acrobatics forefront and center. So all the people who are saying that Sabine could be a Jedi, the Force has to be helping her with some of her acrobatics in this episode. I'm just saying. Has to be. She's not thinking of it so it can actually help her. Because she's stubborn. But we're going to talk about that when we talk about Charge of the Darksaber. And whenever season 2 of Star Wars Ahsoka airs. But we're not there yet. No, not yet at all. So they get their transport and they need a TIE fighter in order to get into the ship, or more accurately to distract the ship, because they have a plan to basically send a TIE in as a EMP that they can detonate, and it can take out all the systems of the Star Destroyer, so they have a chance of actually getting on board using their transport. Unfortunately, all the TIEs at that base were destroyed. Shouldn't there be some other air bases they could also go to? But they do have a TIE fighter. This TIE fighter, Zeb and Ezra stole a few episodes back in, I want to say it was Fighter Flight. He was a little mad that they didn't destroy the TIE, but is happy that they do have the TIE for their plan. There's one problem, and that's because Ezra and Sabine have painted it, probably mostly Sabine, so it does not look like a standard issue TIE. And also the scene where Ezra and Sabine are revealing what they did to the TIE is like it's such a sibling energy type moment. Now this is something I'm probably going to talk about later on than I have before, but the question is the relationship between Ezra and Sabine more of a sibling relationship or a romantic relationship? Because it could go either way depending on when in the timeline we're talking about who's doing the writing and what your personal take is. But this scene definitely leaned into the mischievous sibling energy vibe for their relationship. Other scenes do it differently in this very show. So I'll try to address them whenever they come up. But in short, they get on board Tarkin's Star Destroyer. Now Tarkin smartly had a contingency plan so that way if he does not send an all clear to the other Star Destroyers on time, they send reinforcements. So now they got stormtroopers coming on board that they have to deal with. So they split up. Hera, Sabine, and Zeb basically distract the stormtroopers while getting themselves off, while Ezra goes to rescue Kanan. He gets Kanan, and they eventually end up in the reactor room where they're confronted by the Grand Inquisitor. Kanan borrows Ezra's lightsaber and skillfully uses it, both functions and alternating and at the same time to combat the Grand Inquisitor, which is something that Ezra had not considered. He even notes as much before. He even makes that remark during the duel, witnessing it. Shortly after that, Ezra notices that the Grand Inquisitor has Kanan's lightsaber on his belt, so he force pulls it and joins in the duel. Of course, the Grand Inquisitor, using the spinning lightsaber blade functions, pushes Ezra off the ledge. Thankfully, he lands on another walkway, but Kanan doesn't know that. He uses the Force to retrieve his lightsaber, and he reveals to the Grand Inquisitor that he has nothing left to fear to lose. Something along those lines. And that allows Kanan to defeat the Grand Inquisitor. He skillfully and rightly exploits a huge weakness in the spinning blades of the Grand Inquisitors and the other Inquisitors' lightsabers we've seen in later stories as well. The fact that there's a hole in the middle where you can stick a lightsaber and use it to damage it. And I'm glad they did that on the Sooner side because, yes, the spinning is designed to intimidate, but when someone's not afraid of that intimidation, they can overcome it super easy. In fact, I would love it if that was an option at least in the cutscene for the Star Wars Jedi games, facing one of the Inquisitors. Alas, that's not been an option in the games, but I would love it. But that's getting sidetracked. That scene is really good because it shows Kanan's a really skilled Jedi, but also shows that once he's let go of everything he has to fear to lose, he's able to fully embrace the Force and defeat the Grand Inquisitor. And the Grand Inquisitor basically lets go of the ledge and falls into the reactor that's exploding from his own lightsabers, by the way, because he said there's worse things to fear than death. We get a hint of that at the end of the episode. But they get away. Ezra makes a dark joke about how the Grand Inquisitor doesn't need his TIE fighter anymore. They're waiting for Chopper because Chopper ran away. But don't worry, he didn't run away. He went to get some more rebels to help them get out. So we got 3 Corellian corvettes and also the Ghost showing up and the Gonzati, and they get away. And then, of course, they wonder who's piloting the Ghost. Any guesses? It's Ahsoka. Come on, we all know this. This is spoilers for a 10-year-old show at this point. There's also a holographic message from Bail Organa to confirming to everyone that he's involved in the Rebels Alliance, like we didn't know that. And that's where the Rebel story ends, with Ahsoka introducing herself to them and saying that they don't know what the next step is, but it's basically a new day and there's a lot more ahead of them, and they've been inspiring hope. Then after that we cut back to Lasal. Grand Moff Tarkin is arriving there, being greeted just by Agent Kallus, who remarks that unrest is rising on Lasal, and then Tarkin responds that the Emperor has sent basically an agent to deal with it, an alternative measure. And then we hear, that's right, Darth Vader's breathing, and we see him. He doesn't say anything, but we see him. That's going to tell us something. The Empire is taking this threat of rebellion on Lasal super seriously. But that's where the episode ends. That's where season 1 ends. So, they ended on a high note. They rescued Kanan, and now they're connected with the rest of the Rebel Alliance, and are able to now go out into the greater galaxy. Star Wars Rebels started this trend of a first season of the Star Wars shows being very tight-knit. You don't get too much outside of the primary location, and then it ends in such a way that season 2 can expand. Star Wars Resistance followed this formula. Even The Mandalorian followed this formula to a certain degree as well. And The Bad Batch, not as much, but still, the earlier episodes have generally always been a more tight-knit, where we get to know the characters and all that, and the feel of the show. Before then, they go introducing other things in the show as that can be going on, like everything going on from Mount Tantus. That was not done at all in season 1 of The Bad Batch, and this formula has been basically the hallmark of Star Wars storytelling since Star Wars Rebels. The Acolyte didn't seem to do that, but again, the Acolyte will unfortunately not going to get a season 2, so we don't know how the story could have expanded. Star Wars Andor looks like season 2 is going to be putting Andor into the wider rebellion than we had in season 1. Book of Boba Fett was limited run. Obi-Wan was limited run. Ahsoka, we're probably going to see a bigger story, especially now we'll probably be following Ezra in the main galaxy, and then Ahsoka and Sabine on Peridia, so that's going to be expanding the scope. Star Wars Rebels is a very important show, because not just because it's good, but because it established a formula that is pretty good at creating a successful Star Wars show. Of course, we got way more of Star Wars Rebels to discuss, so when am I going to discuss the shorts I mentioned earlier? So next week I am going to be doing my season 1 review compilation, but after that, that's when I'm going to do just one video where I talk about all 4 of those shorts, because they do need to be talked about, and I can't believe I forgot it. No, I'm actually going to switch them around so I can include the shorts discussion in my season 1 finale, my season 1 review compilation. I think that's going to work better. But also, the big question I think you're wondering is, when am I going to talk about season 2's first episode? Actually, first 2 episodes, because it's a 2-parter, The Siege of Lasal. I have 2 possible dates I can go with. I can go with April 18th, which is when the Siege of Lasal was showcased at Celebration Anaheim, or I could go based off of when it aired on Disney XD, which was June 20th. I am going to go with the Disney XD air date, because That's what I've been doing for all these previously, so I might as well keep that consistent. So that pretty much covers most of my thoughts on Star Wars Rebels final episode. Fire Across the Galaxy, I think, was a great ending, very fitting to the story that they were telling. The story of really the small group of rebels as a found family coming together to rescue one of their own captured by the Empire, and as a result getting connected to the greater Star Wars galaxy and the greater rebel movement that this show is partially telling us about. And like I said, I know in season 2 things are going to get bigger, but this was a great way of introducing our characters and also finishing the season 1 story. We know who these characters are. So that's where I'm going to end my review. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So now that I've taken a look at each episode of Star Wars Rebels Season 1, let's talk about the show as a whole. To begin with, we need to address the elephant in the room. Star Wars Rebels was the very first Star Wars show produced after not only the cancellation of the beloved Star Wars The Clone Wars, but also after the Disney acquisition of Star Wars and of Lucasfilm. And the cancellation of the Clone Wars was a result of that. And I have to say, many people, I felt like, did not give Star Wars Rebels a fair chance because of it. And there's still people who don't give new Star Wars a chance simply because of the fact that Disney is attached to it. Disney has its problems as a company, but their treatment of Star Wars has actually been pretty decent. I feel like Lucasfilm has a little more independence than some of the other subsidiaries that are making films and all that. I feel like Star Wars has done better than Marvel too. But this is about Star Wars Rebels, and the main show that people compared it to at the time, and still, I would say, is Star Wars The Clone Wars, which was beloved by fans, and its cancellation was not a happy moment for Star Wars fans. So of course, Rebels, being that first show produced after said show's cancellation, gets the brunt of the attention, and people were not kind. People complain about the animation of Rebels, they complain about the writing compared to the Clone Wars, but the thing is early Clone Wars, this here is this Clone Wars movie, which was made for TV. Can I say something? Writing is okay, but the animation, is it rough. Early Clone Wars had some pretty rough animation. Rebels, while not as good as the highs of the Clone Wars, the animation was way better than the lows of the Clone Wars, and that's something we have to acknowledge about it. In fact, the writing of Rebels too is, especially in season 1, consistently way better than the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars, the highs were so high in both animation and writing, but the lows, oh man, the lows in both were awful. But Rebels never reached the same lows. So in other ways, I would say the highs of the Clone Wars were great. The consistency of Rebels made it really good. And that's what Rebels is. Its writing and animation were consistent throughout its run, only improving, and never reached the lows of the Clone Wars. But it did help that most of the same team worked on both, so that probably is why the Rebels never reached the lows of the Clone Wars, because they had learned from their lows. But with all that said, we should actually talk about Star Wars Rebels Season 1 and not keep on comparing it to the Clone Wars like so many people still do and did back in the day. So, what makes Star Wars Rebels so good in my opinion? I already mentioned its consistency, but it's a story of found family. That's been one of the hallmarks of Star Wars storytelling, especially post-Disney's acquisition, weirdly enough. But found family, we have a bunch of rebels coming together, finding themselves, finding a family amongst each other, and fighting the Empire. Which is just so great. Tyranny needs to be opposed, and it helps when you have people to help support you, and the found family is just that. Our characters are compelling, obviously even complex, though we don't get too much of that in season 1, but we will in later seasons. Later seasons will also give us some character development, but the character I would say that gets the most development in season 1 is Ezra Bridger. More than any other character, he is the main character of season 1. He's our point of view character for all this, and that's why I think season 1 is also probably the most tight-knit, the most on the saw. Later seasons will expand the scope, expand characters, but here it's tight, it's confined, it's our entry into the world. Just like this is Ezra's entry into the rebellion. It's small, it's not big yet. Another important thing about Ezra's character is is his found family as a ghost crew unlocks not just his force potential and he begins to learn how to use it, but it also unlocks his good heart. Ezra is space Aladdin. Many people made that comparison back in the day, but that is true. A street rat with a heart of gold. And like Aladdin, he just needed to be put in the right situation for it to be unlocked and shown. And Ezra remarks that he likes how helping others makes him feel. Being a good person does feel good. It's rewarding in and of itself, even if no one thanks you. Being good feels good. And that's the heart of Star Wars Rebels Season 1. It's this street rat character learning to be his best self and helping others. That's what it is. There's a reason why both in universe and in the writer's room they had Ezra be the one who spoke the Ghost Crew call to action in the episode Call to Action. It made, thematically, that made the most sense. And that continues to the end of the series where it's Ezra who leads the mission, who helps motivate everyone else to free Kanan and do so while also destroying a Star Destroyer. So that's where I'm going to end my Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels 10th Anniversary review. Please stay tuned. Eventually we will be talking about Season 2, but we got a couple months to go for that. So stay tuned for that. I'll try to make sure I put out a community post letting you guys know when it's going to be out in a week. Hopefully I'll remember. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts on Star Wars Rebels Season 1 in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.